Get out and take that child with you. The freezing Atlanta storm raged around us, but my husband's voice cut through the thunder with crystal clarity. The passenger door of his luxury sedan was kicked wide open. The icy rain poured in, soaking the pristine leather seats. He reached across me, shoved my shoulder hard, and threw my cheap diaper bag straight into the flooded gutter. Chloe, the woman he was leaving me for, sat in the driver's seat, adjusting her rearview mirror. She popped her expensive lip gloss, laughed softly, and said, "You better hurry up and get out. That nappy hair of yours is going to shrink right up in this weather." My husband slammed his foot on the gas before I even had both feet fully on the pavement. The car sped away, splashing freezing mud across my legs as I stood there in the dark, shielding my 1-month-old baby girl from the storm. Just as my knees began to give out, a massive bulletproof BMW pulled up smoothly to the curb. The rear door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped out into the rain holding a large umbrella. Before I could even react, he looked at me, his voice thick with suppressed anger. "I have been looking for you for 5 years. My name is Nia, 29 years old, and somehow still healing from the wounds the person I trusted most inflicted on me. As a cosmetic chemist, I eventually built an empire, but getting there required surviving a betrayal that almost destroyed me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been pushed to your absolute breaking point, only to come back stronger than anyone imagined. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta meant I had to fight for every opportunity. I did not come from a legacy family. I did not have light skin or loose curls, the things my husband DeAndre and his elite circle secretly worshipped. I just had my brain, my degree in chemistry, and a relentless drive. But DeAndre knew exactly how to dim my light. The night he threw me out into the street was the culmination of years of emotional starvation. We were supposed to be driving home from a tense dinner where he had berated me for wearing a dress he deemed too cheap for his image. He was the regional sales director for a massive cosmetics firm, always obsessed with appearances. I was just the exhausted wife who had given birth 4 weeks prior. The argument in the car had escalated quickly. I had finally confronted him about the hotel receipts I found in his jacket. I confronted him about Chloe. Chloe was his coworker. She came from a wealthy, connected family. She was everything his toxic relatives told him he deserved. Instead of apologizing or denying it, DeAndre simply snapped. He told me he was done pretending. He told me I was dragging him down, that I was an embarrassment to his rising status, and that Chloe was his true match. When the rain started coming down in sheets, he did not care. He ordered Chloe to pull over in the worst part of town. The physical sensation of that moment will stay with me forever. The wind howled through the empty street, biting at my exposed skin. I clutched my daughter Zuri tightly against my chest, wrapping my thin coat around her tiny body to block the freezing rain. The water soaked through my clothes instantly. My feet, shoved into flimsy flat shoes, were submerged in freezing puddles. I watched the red taillights of DeAndre's car disappear around the corner, leaving me completely alone. I had no phone. It was in my purse, which was still in his car. I had $20 in my pocket and a diaper bag slowly sinking into the mud. Panic clawed at my throat. I looked around the desolate street, searching for an awning, a bus stop, any kind of shelter. Zuri began to cry, a high and thin wail that shattered my heart. I whispered promises to her that I did not know how I would keep. I told her Mommy had her, that everything would be okay. But I was shaking so violently I could barely stand. That was when the black BMW glided through the storm and stopped just inches from where I stood on the curb. The headlights cut through the heavy rain, blinding me for a second. My first instinct was fear. A luxury vehicle in this neighborhood at midnight usually meant trouble. I took a step back, shielding Zuri even more. But the man who stepped out was not a threat. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with an aura of absolute authority. He wore a dark, immaculate suit and carried a wide black umbrella. He stepped right into the freezing puddle without even glancing down at his expensive shoes. He held the umbrella over me, blocking the rain. I blinked through the water dripping from my eyelashes. I did not know him, but he looked at me with a mixture of relief and intense fury. "Naya," he said, his voice steady against the wind, Get in the car. Your child is freezing. I hesitated, my survival instincts screaming. Who are you? I managed to ask, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. How do you know my name? He gently guided me toward the open door of the warm leather-lined back seat. My name is Elias Sterling, he said, and I have been looking for you for 5 years. The name hit me like a physical blow. Elias Sterling, the billionaire venture capitalist, the man who funded the biggest black-owned tech and beauty startups in the country. But why would he be looking for me? I collapsed into the back seat, the warmth of the heater immediately enveloping us. Zuri quieted down, nestled against my chest. Elias got in the other side, shaking off his umbrella. He handed me a thick, dry wool blanket. I wrapped it around my baby, my hands trembling violently. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Elias turned to me. His expression was a mix of admiration and deep sorrow. You do not know, do you? He asked softly. Know what I asked? My voice barely above a whisper. 5 years ago, you sent a prototype of a botanical hair restoration formula to my investment firm. He said, his eyes never leaving my face. It was the most brilliant piece of cosmetic chemistry my analysts had ever seen. It stabilized organic compounds in a way the industry thought was impossible. I sent a contract to the email address on the file. I offered $2 million in seed funding to start your own laboratory. I stopped breathing. The hum of the car's engine felt entirely too loud. No, I stammered. No, that is not true. DeAndre checked that email account for me. He told me your firm sent a rejection letter. He said they laughed at my submission. He told me the formula was unstable and useless. He said I was wasting my time and needed to focus on supporting his career. Elias' jaw tightened. A muscle leaped in his cheek as he processed the depth of the betrayal. Your husband did not just intercept my offer, Naya. He responded to it. He claimed to be your manager. He tried to negotiate the rights into his own name. When my legal team refused to deal with anyone but the creator, he went dark. He deleted the accounts, changed your phone numbers, and vanished. We lost track of you. I have had private investigators looking for you ever since. I only found you tonight because my team finally flagged a new address connected to his recent corporate merger. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers. 5 years. For 5 years, I had believed I was a failure. I had put my degree in a drawer. I had taken menial jobs to pay the rent while DeAndre climbed the corporate ladder. I had cooked, cleaned, and shrunk myself down to make him feel big. I had endured the sneers from his sister Jasmine, who constantly reminded me that I brought nothing to the table. I had endured the condescension from his parents, who told everyone I was lucky DeAndre settled for someone of my pedigree. And all along he was standing on my neck to make himself look taller. He stole my life, I whispered, the realization settling into my bones like lead. He kept me broke and dependent on purpose. He made me think I was nothing so I would never leave him. Elias nodded slowly. Yes, he did. And based on what I just witnessed on that street corner, he finally decided he no longer needed to pretend. He discarded you because he thinks you have nothing left to offer. He thinks you are powerless. I looked down at Zuri. Her little chest rose and fell evenly. She was safe, she was warm, but she was fatherless because of a monster. The sadness that had been suffocating me for months evaporated. The tears that had been pricking my eyes dried up instantly. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, spreading a different kind of heat through my veins. It was not sorrow, it was absolute, unadulterated rage. Elias leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on his silver-handled cane. I can have my driver take you to a hotel, Nia. I can get you a lawyer. We can sue him for everything he has. We can destroy his career by morning. I looked up. I looked out the tinted window at the city lights blurring in the rain. Suing him would give him a chance to fight back. It would give him a chance to play the victim, to use his corporate connections and his mistress family wealth to drag me through the mud. That was not enough. I did not just want to ruin his current life. I wanted to build the empire he stole from me, and I wanted him to watch me do it from the gutter. I turned to Elias Sterling. I did not cry. My voice did not shake. I do not want a ride to a hotel. Mr. Sterling, I said, my tone as freezing as the storm outside, and I do not want a lawyer. Not yet. What do you want? He asked, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I want a laboratory. I want the funding you offered me 5 years ago. I am going to recreate that formula from memory, and I am going to make it 10 times better. I am going to build my own company from the ground up. Elias chuckled, a deep rumbling sound of pure approval. And your husband? I held Zuri a little tighter. My husband believes I am nothing without him. Let him believe that. Let him climb his corporate ladder. Let him marry his wealthy mistress. Let him get right to the very top. I want him to feel safe. And when he reaches the peak, I am going to be the one to push him off. Elias reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. He handed it to me. Be at my office at 8 tomorrow morning. We have work to do. I took the card, gripping it so tightly the edges dug into my palm. The rain continued to batter the roof of the car, but I no longer felt the cold. The naive, insecure girl who got in DeAndre's car that evening was dead, washed away in the storm. The woman who sat in the back of the BMW was something else entirely. I was going to take back my crown, and I was going to make sure DeAndre lost absolutely everything. Fast forward 5 years. The air inside Onyx Crown always smelled of crushed lavender and cold-pressed argan oil. I formulated that signature scent myself. Over the past 5 years, I had transformed my pain into a multi-million-dollar reality. Onyx Crown was no longer just a dream scribbled in a notebook. It was the most exclusive high-end Black-owned salon and wellness spa in Buckhead, Atlanta. We did not just accept walk-ins. Our client list was a closely guarded secret filled with A-list actors, elite athletes, and the city's top executives. The floors were imported black marble polished so highly they reflected the crystal chandeliers above. Every detail was curated to provide a sanctuary for Black women who demanded nothing but absolute perfection. My days of standing in the freezing rain were over. I spent my mornings in my private laboratory on the top floor perfecting new organic compounds and my afternoons managing an empire that was expanding across the East Coast. Elias Sterling had kept his word. He gave me the funding, but I did the work. I built this fortress with my own 2 hands. And I made sure it was a place where women who looked like me with natural hair and deep brown skin were treated like absolute royalty. It was a busy Tuesday afternoon. I was in my glass-walled office on the mezzanine level, reviewing the final blueprints for our new Chicago location. The soundproofing in my office usually blocked out the ambient noise of the salon below. But even through the thick acoustic glass, I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of someone screaming. I glanced down at the main reception area. The serene, spa-like atmosphere was being shattered by a woman standing at the front desk. She was waving a designer handbag frantically, her voice echoing off the marble walls. I did not need to see her face to recognize the entitlement dripping from every word. It was a voice that used to haunt my nightmares. It was Jasmine, DeAndre's younger sister. I set my pen down. I leaned back in my leather chair and watched the scene unfold on the security monitors on my desk. I could hear the audio perfectly. "Do you know who I am?" Jasmine shrieked at my lead receptionist, Kiara. Kiara was a brilliant young woman, a college student I was personally mentoring. She stood behind the desk, her posture perfect, maintaining a calm and professional demeanor despite the verbal assault. "I apologize," Mom, Kiara said smoothly, "but as I explained, our VIP suites are booked 6 months in advance. We cannot accommodate a walk-in appointment for a diamond facial today, regardless of who you are." Jasmine slammed her hand flat against the reception desk. The loud smack made several clients in the waiting area turn their heads in shock. "I am not a walk-in," Jasmine sneered. "I am legacy. My family practically built this city. My brother is DeAndre. He is the regional director of the biggest cosmetics firm in the Southeast. He is closing a $70 million merger on Friday. Do you comprehend how much money that is, you little girl? We own half the properties in this zip code." I watched Jasmine pace back and forth. She was wearing a loud, heavily branded outfit that screamed new money and deep insecurity. Her hair was bone straight, processed to within an inch of its life, a sharp contrast to the lush, healthy, natural styles of the women sitting comfortably in the waiting area. She looked frantic, desperate to prove she belonged in a space that clearly intimidated her. Kiara did not flinch. "Congratulations on your brother's success, ma'am. However, Onyx Crown operates strictly by appointment. If you would like, I can add you to our waitlist for next February." Next February? Jasmine gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Are you out of your mind? I have a gala to attend this weekend. I need the suite today. Move someone. Cancel one of these other appointments." Jasmine waved her hand dismissively toward a woman sitting nearby reading a magazine. The woman happened to be a federal judge, though Jasmine clearly had no idea. "I cannot do that," Kiara replied, her voice remaining steady and polite. "Every guest here is treated with equal priority." Jasmine leaned over the desk, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "This is exactly what happens when you let street people work in high-end establishments. You have absolutely no class and no home training. You do not understand how things work for people of my caliber. You probably took the bus here from the South Side this morning. My brother is about to be a CEO. My family donates thousands of dollars to my HBCU Alumni Association every single year. I am a Spelman woman. We demand respect." Kiara's smile tightened just a fraction, but she held her ground. "Mom, I am going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You are disturbing our guests." "Do not you dare tell me to lower my voice," Jasmine yelled, pointing a French manicured finger just inches from Kiara's face. "You are nothing but a glorified secretary." "I am tired of this ghetto attitude ruining Buckhead. This place is supposed to be exclusive, but clearly they let just anyone stand behind the counter." "Bring me the manager." "Actually, no. Do not bring me the manager. Bring me the owner, right now. I want the owner down here this instant, and I'm going to stand right here and watch while they fire you." I watched the monitor for another few seconds. Jasmine was vibrating with rage, her chest heaving, fully believing she had won the interaction. She truly believed that throwing her brother's name around the same brother who had thrown me into the street with nothing gave her the right to dehumanize my staff. She believed that her light skin privilege and her legacy status made her untouchable. 5 years ago, Jasmine used to sit in my small apartment and make those exact same comments to my face. She used to look at my natural hair and ask when I was going to fix it. She used to ask DeAndre why he married someone so unrefined. She used to laugh when he belittled my career aspirations. She was the cheerleader for my destruction. A cold, familiar calm washed over me. I had spent half a decade preparing for the moment my past would intersect with my present. I just did not expect it to be delivered so perfectly to my front door. I stood up from my desk. I smoothed down the jacket of my tailored emerald green Tom Ford suit. The fabric felt like armor. I checked my reflection in the glass. My hair was styled in thick, glorious, natural locks that cascaded down my back, adorned with subtle gold cuffs. My makeup was flawless, highlighting the deep melanin of my skin that Jasmine and DeAndre had always treated as a flaw. I looked like money. I looked like power. I looked like the woman they tried to kill, reborn as an absolute queen. I pressed the button on my intercom. "Kiara," I said, my voice projecting softly through the earpiece she wore. "Do not call security. I am coming down." I walked out of my office and stepped into the private glass elevator that connected the mezzanine to the main lobby. I pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator descended silently, a transparent cylinder sliding down the center of the grand room. Down below, Jasmine was still ranting. "I will make sure this place is shut down," she barked at Kiara. "You have no idea who you are messing with. My brother will buy this entire building just to bulldoze it and turn it into a parking lot. That is the kind of power we have. You better start packing up your desk." The quiet, elegant ping of the elevator arriving at the ground floor cut through her shouting. The heavy glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The lobby went completely silent. The clients in the waiting area lowered their magazines. Kiara took a step back from the desk, respectfully making way. I stepped out of the elevator. The sharp click of my Christian Louboutin heels against the marble floor echoed in the sudden quiet. I walked slowly, deliberately, my posture completely straight. I kept my eyes locked directly on Jasmine. Jasmine turned around to face the elevator. A smug, triumphant smile plastered across her face, clearly expecting an apologetic owner ready to cater to her every whim. She opened her mouth to speak, ready to demand Kiara's immediate termination, but the words never came out. Her mouth hung open. The smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color completely drained from her face. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting from my Tom Ford suit to the gold cuffs in my hair to the undeniable authority with which I carried myself. She took a stumbling step backward, her designer bag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her hands began to shake. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. And in a way she had. She was looking at the ghost of the woman she and her brother had murdered 5 years ago in the rain. I stopped walking when I was exactly 3 feet away from her. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I just looked at her with the cold, detached curiosity one might reserve for an insect on the sidewalk. "Can I help you, Jasmine?" I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly level. "I heard you were looking for the owner." Jasmine tried to speak. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, raspy sound came out. She stared at me, her mind clearly short-circuiting as she tried to reconcile the wealthy, powerful CEO standing in front of her with the broken, discarded wife she remembered. "Nia," she finally choked out the name, sounding like sandpaper in her throat. "Nia, what are you doing here? Are you the manager?" I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap snap shut. "I am not the manager, Jasmine. I own the building. I own the brand. I own the very floor you are standing on right now." The silence in the room was absolute. Jasmine looked around wildly as if expecting someone to pop out and tell her this was a practical joke. But there was no joke. There was only me standing in my fortress holding all the cards. The first layer of my revenge had just walked right into my hands, and I was about to peel it back. Jasmine stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Her eyes darted from my perfectly tailored suit to the solid gold cuffs woven into my hair. I could see the gears turning in her head violently, rejecting the reality standing right in front of her. Then a sharp, nervous laugh erupted from her throat. She tossed her bone-straight hair over her shoulder, trying desperately to regain the high ground she felt slipping away. "You own this place!" she scoffed, her voice shrill and echoing in the silent marble-lined lobby. "Right. And I am the Queen of England. Who are you sleeping with to get a management title, Nia? Did Elias Sterling feel sorry for you? Did DeAndre's little charity case finally get a real job and let it go to her head? You are still the same broke, pathetic girl who cried when my brother put her out in the rain. You do not own anything. You are just playing dress-up in a world you will never belong to." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of the rage that would have consumed me 5 years ago. I simply walked over to the reception desk, my heels clicking methodically against the floor, and extended my hand to my receptionist. "The tablet, please, Kiara," I said softly. Kiara immediately handed me the sleek iPad used for our exclusive client management database. I tapped the screen, bringing up the master administrative dashboard. I turned the screen slightly so Jasmine could see the glowing onyx-crowned CEO and founder credentials locked at the top of the interface. Her eyes darted across the text, the truth finally beginning to pierce through her thick armor of classist denial. I pulled up her profile. She was not a VIP. She was merely on our lower-tier waiting list, clinging to a basic profile she had created months ago in hopes of gaining entry. I tapped the red delete icon. "Membership revoked," I stated calmly. "But that is just housekeeping. Let us talk about legacy, Jasmine." I scrolled down to the corporate philanthropy tab. "You mentioned you are a Spellman woman," I said, my tone conversational as if we were discussing the weather rather than dismantling her social standing. "You mentioned your family donates thousands to your alumni association. That is wonderful. I'm a massive advocate for supporting historically Black colleges and universities. In fact, Onyx Crown is the primary corporate sponsor for the Atlanta Alumni Chapter's annual gala. We provide a $50,000 scholarship fund every spring to support young Black women entering the STEM fields. Jasmine swallowed hard, her bravado faltering. Her hands clutched her designer bag tighter. What does that have to do with anything? I tapped a button on the screen. A prompt appeared asking to confirm the permanent cancellation of the recurring annual grant. It has everything to do with this, I replied, making sure my voice carried across the quiet lobby. Because as the sole owner and CEO of this brand, I personally approve every single philanthropic endeavor. And my company operates under a very strict code of ethics. We do not align our wealth with organizations that harbor individuals who come into my establishment, disrespect my staff, and use their perceived legacy status to degrade other Black women. I pressed confirm. The system chimed softly, finalizing the transaction. I looked up at her, my expression completely flat. I just formally revoked the $50,000 scholarship. When your alumni board calls you tomorrow morning to ask why their biggest corporate sponsor suddenly pulled their funding, you can tell them it was because you threw a classless tantrum over a diamond facial. A collective gasp rippled through the luxurious waiting area. The federal judge sitting near the floor-to-ceiling window lowered her magazine completely, her eyes wide with undisguised approval. Two other clients' wives of prominent local politicians exchanged shocked but highly entertained glances. Jasmine was being publicly humiliated in front of the exact high society crowd she desperately wanted to impress. Jasmine turned a blotchy, mottled red. The veins in her neck strained against her skin, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You cannot do that," she hissed, taking a threatening step toward the desk. "You cannot just cut off funding. My family will ruin you. My brother is closing a $70 million corporate merger on Friday. He will buy this entire block and have you evicted. You are a delusional hood rat." She reached into her bag with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. "I am calling DeAndre right now. He is going to call his corporate lawyers. We are going to sue you for discrimination. We are going to take every single thing you have and put you back in the gutter where you belong." She tapped her screen aggressively and hit the speakerphone button, holding the phone up like a weapon for the entire room to hear. The phone rang twice before a smooth, incredibly arrogant voice answered. "What is it, Jasmine? I am in the middle of a board meeting." DeAndre's voice filled the lobby. Hearing his voice after 5 years sent a brief phantom chill down my spine. It was the voice that had commanded me to get out of his car. It was the voice that had convinced me I was worthless. But the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating anticipation. The fire in my veins quickly burned away any residual ghosts of my past. "DeAndre, you need to call the lawyers right now," Jasmine yelled, her voice breaking with a mixture of humiliation and unhinged rage. "I am at Onyx Crown, and your crazy ex-wife is here. She is pretending to own the place. She just insulted me in front of half the city and canceled my alumni scholarship. You need to come down here and put this delusional hood rat in her place. Tell her who you are. Tell her what you are about to do to this city." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched over the speakerphone. Then DeAndre laughed. It was the exact same cruel, dismissive laugh I remembered from the night he left me and Zuri in the storm. "Nia," he said, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "Nia is there. Put her on." Jasmine thrust the phone toward me across the marble reception desk, a vicious sneer twisting her features. "Tell her, DeAndre. Put her in her place." I leaned in slightly, my hands resting calmly on the cool stone edge of the desk. "Hello, DeAndre," I said softly. "Well, well," DeAndre sneered through the speaker, his words echoing in the pristine lobby. "I see you finally found someone to give you a job. I always knew you would end up scrubbing floors or answering phones somewhere. Listen to me very carefully, Nia. You are going to apologize to my sister right now. You are going to give her whatever she wants. Or I will personally call the actual owner of that establishment and make sure you are back on the street by the end of the day. You are nothing. You have always been nothing. Do not make me remind you of how easily I can erase you." Jasmine smiled triumphantly. She looked around the room, expecting the wealthy onlookers to be nodding in agreement, validating her brother's ruthless threat. Instead, they watched with silent, intense scrutiny. I let his words hang in the air. I let the silence stretch until it became suffocating for everyone but me. I let him feel the full, intoxicating weight of his own arrogance, knowing exactly how hard he was about to fall. I had spent the last 2 years paying top forensic accountants to track every single move he made. I knew he was inflating his revenues to look attractive to the conglomerate buying him out. I knew he was desperate. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. "I am telling you what is going to happen," DeAndre snapped, annoyed by my lack of fear. I smiled. It was a cold, empty thing. I leaned closer to the phone, ensuring my voice was perfectly clear, slicing through his ego like a surgical blade. "Careful, DeAndre," I said, my words sharp and devastatingly precise. "The SEC might be interested in why your Q3 financial reports do not match your Cayman Island wire transfers." The silence that followed was not just heavy, it was absolute. It was the sound of a man plummeting from a great height and suddenly realizing his parachute was missing. The confident, booming executive on the other end of the line ceased to exist. DeAndre went dead silent. "DeAndre," Jasmine prompted, her voice suddenly losing its confident edge. Her phone hovered in the air between us. "DeAndre. Tell her she is crazy. Tell her to shut up." Nothing. Just the faint, hollow sound of static on the line. He could not speak. He knew that only someone with access to his deepest, most heavily guarded corporate secrets could possibly know about the Cayman Island accounts. I stood up straight, smoothing my suit jacket one last time. "Have a wonderful board meeting, DeAndre. I will see you at the charity gala this weekend." "Tell Chloe I said hello." I reached across the desk and tapped the red button on Jasmine's phone, instantly cutting the connection. Jasmine stared at this darkened screen of her phone, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The triumphant energy had completely drained from her body, replaced by a creeping, nauseating dread. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a new profound realization. The illusion of her superiority had shattered into a million pieces on my marble floor. She finally understood that the woman standing before her was not a victim begging for scraps. I was an apex predator and her entire family was bleeding in the water. "Kiara," I said, not taking my eyes off Jasmine's pale face. "Yes, Miss Sterling," Kiara responded instantly, her posture flawless. "Please escort this woman off my property. If she refuses to leave, call building security. If she ever sets foot in Onyx Crown again, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing." I turned on my heel and walked back toward my private glass elevator. I did not look back. I did not need to. The frantic, stumbling sound of Jasmine's designer heels retreating quickly across the lobby floor was all the confirmation I required. The first layer of their arrogance had been peeled away, exposing the fragile, terrified rot underneath. The real war was just beginning, and I held every single weapon. 3 days later, the battlefield shifted from my polished marble lobby to the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel. The annual Heritage Foundation Gala was the crown jewel of Atlanta's Black high society. It was a room filled with generational wealth, political power, and corporate titans. For most, it was a night of philanthropy and networking. For DeAndre and his new wife, Chloe, it was a desperate lifeline. I knew from my forensic accountants that DeAndre's regional division was hemorrhaging money. He needed the upcoming corporate merger to hide his massive financial failures. And to secure that merger, he needed private investors tonight to bridge his capital gap. Chloe, with her family connections and her supposedly brilliant new product launch, was his golden ticket. They had no idea their golden ticket was a counterfeit. I arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. I did not slip in quietly through a side door like I would have 5 years ago. I walked through the main double doors on the arm of Elias Sterling. Elias was a legend in these circles. When he entered a room, the room stopped breathing. And tonight, I was the woman standing beside him. I wore a custom floor-length gown made of midnight blue silk that draped perfectly across my skin. My hair was styled in an intricate regal crown of twists. I wore no necklace, letting the sheer elegance of my posture command attention. As Elias and I descended the grand staircase, the low hum of conversation in the ballroom began to die down. Heads turned, glasses were lowered. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a current of electricity. People recognized Elias instantly, but it took them a moment to place me. The last time most of these people had seen me, I was the quiet, poorly dressed wife trailing behind DeAndre holding his coat and trying to make myself invisible. Now I was the owner of the fastest growing luxury brand in the city, standing shoulder to shoulder with a billionaire. Across the room, standing near a towering champagne pyramid, I spotted them, DeAndre and Chloe. DeAndre's jaw physically dropped. His cocktail glass tipped slightly, spilling amber liquid onto his expensive tuxedo shoes. Chloe gripped his arm, her light eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and sudden, sharp panic. They had clearly heard about Jasmine's humiliation at my salon, but seeing me here, in their exclusive domain, was a reality they were not prepared to face. Elias patted my hand where it rested on his arm. "Look at them panic," he murmured, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. "I am going to say hello to the mayor, Nia. Take your time. Enjoy the hunt." He stepped away into a crowd of eager politicians. I walked slowly toward the back of the ballroom, deliberately giving my enemies a moving target. I needed them to come to me. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stopped beside a massive, intricately carved ice sculpture of a swan. I did not have to wait long. "Well, look who decided to crash a party above her pay grade." The voice was shrill and laced with decades of unearned superiority. I turned slowly. It was Patricia, DeAndre's mother. Standing right behind her was Gregory, his father. They looked exactly as I remembered them. Patricia was draped in ostentatious jewelry that looked more like armor than accessories, her face pulled tight with disapproval. Gregory stood with his chest puffed out, holding a scotch glass like a weapon. "Hello, Patricia," I said calmly. "Gregory, it is a private gala. You cannot crash it. You have to be invited." Patricia scoffed, stepping closer, invading my personal space in an attempt to intimidate me. "Do not play games with me, Nia. We know exactly what you are doing. Jasmine told us about your little stunt at whatever that storefront of yours is called. You think because you tricked some rich old man into paying for a makeover and a fake business title that you are suddenly one of us." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a vicious hiss. "You are not one of us. You will never be one of us. You are a street girl who got lucky that my son had a moment of pity for you." I took a slow sip of my water. I felt no sting from her words. Patricia was a woman whose entire identity was wrapped up in the accomplishments of the men around her. She had nothing of her own but spite. "Your son did not pity me, Patricia," I replied evenly. "He used me, and when he realized he could not control me anymore, he tried to destroy me." Gregory stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Watch your mouth when you speak about my son. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous ex-wife. You stole our granddaughter in the middle of the night and hid her from us for 5 years. And now you show up here stalking DeAndre at his most important corporate event, trying to extort him." I almost laughed. "Stole her. DeAndre threw a 1-month-old baby into a freezing rainstorm and never once called to see if she survived the night. He did not care about Zuri, neither did they. They only cared about the optics of a broken family tree." "I did not steal Zuri," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly composed. "DeAndre abandoned her. And as for extortion, I do not need a single dime from your son. I make more in a quarter than his entire division bills in a year." Patricia rolled her eyes dramatically, waving her diamond-ringed hand in the air. "Oh, please, stop the delusions. You are obsessed with him. You are obsessed because he finally upgraded to a woman of true pedigree. Chloe comes from a real family, a family with history, with wealth, with actual class. She is a brilliant chemist, launching a revolutionary product tonight. What do you have, Nia? A hair salon where you braid hair for your little street friends." She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "You thought putting on a silk dress would make DeAndre regret leaving you. It just proves how desperate you are. You still do not fit in here. You are an embarrassment. If you had any dignity left, you would turn around and walk out those doors before security throws you out." The music in the ballroom shifted to a lively jazz number, but the tension in our small corner by the ice sculpture was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gregory crossed his arms, looking at me with pure contempt. Listen to my wife, Nia. We are asking you nicely. Leave. DeAndre is closing a massive deal tonight. Chloe's presentation is going to secure the final investors. Do not ruin this because you cannot handle the fact that he moved on to someone vastly superior to you. I looked past them. The stage at the front of the ballroom was brightly lit. The master of ceremonies was stepping up to the microphone, tapping it twice. The crowd began to murmur, migrating slowly toward the stage for the evening's main event. Chloe was standing near the stairs leading up to the podium. She wore a sparkling silver gown, holding a sleek prototype bottle of her supposed miracle product. DeAndre stood beside her, kissing her cheek, playing the role of the supportive, powerful husband perfectly. They looked so confident. They looked like they had the entire world in the palm of their hands. They had built a beautiful, shining castle on top of a foundation of lies, theft, and my stolen intellectual property. And I held the detonator. I turned my attention back to Patricia and Gregory. Their faces were flushed with the thrill of bullying me, fully expecting me to burst into tears and run out of the room just like I used to when they verbally abused me at family dinners. They expected me to shrink. I did not shrink. I stepped closer to Patricia. I was taller than her in my heels, and I used every inch of that advantage to look down directly into her eyes. My expression was completely void of emotion. I was a blank, terrifying slate. I am not here to extort your son, Patricia, I whispered, my voice slicing through the jazz music with lethal precision. And I am not here because I am jealous of his new wife. I raised my hand and pointed a single perfectly manicured finger toward the brightly lit stage. The master of ceremonies was currently announcing Chloe's name. The crowd was beginning to applaud politely. Instead of defending myself, I simply held my gaze on Patricia. I want you to turn around, I said softly. I want you to take out your phone. Patricia frowned, genuinely confused by my lack of reaction. What are you talking about? I leaned in just a fraction closer, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of an executioner reading a final sentence. I said you might want to record this. Your new daughter-in-law is about to make history. I turned my back on them before they could utter another word. I walked smoothly through the parting crowd, finding a perfect vantage point right in the center of the room, dead ahead of the stage. I watched Chloe step up to the microphone, smiling radiantly, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to open up and swallow her whole. The ambush from DeAndre's parents was a pathetic opening act. The real show was just about to begin. The stage was bathed in a warm golden spotlight that made Chloe look like an angel of corporate innovation. She gripped the edges of the lucite podium, flashing a bright camera-ready smile. Behind her, a massive digital screen displayed the sleek minimalist logo of her new product line. The name of the brand was written in elegant cursive, Botanical Crown. I almost smirked at the lack of originality. For years, women of color have been forced to choose between healthy hair and manageable hair. Chloe began, her voice echoing perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Her tone was practiced, dripping with a fake empathy that made my stomach turn. We have relied on harsh chemicals that damage our roots and strip our natural moisture. But today, my team and I are introducing a revolution. A fully organic bioactive serum that reconstructs textured hair on a molecular level without a single synthetic compound. The investors sitting at the VIP tables right in front of the stage nodded in unison. These were men and women who controlled millions of dollars in venture capital. They saw the massive, untapped market potential. They saw a beautiful, light-skinned woman from a prominent family, selling them a clean beauty narrative. They were completely sold. DeAndre stood off to the side of the stage. His arms crossed, his chest puffed out with pride. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "Thank you for your time," Chloe concluded, gesturing graciously to the crowd. "We have a few minutes before the dinner service begins, so I would love to open the floor to any questions from our potential partners." A microphone stand was positioned in the center aisle between the dining tables. A few investors shifted in their seats, preparing to ask standard financial questions about profit margins and distribution channels. I did not give them the chance. I moved seamlessly through the crowd. My midnight blue gown brushed quietly against the carpet as I stepped up to the microphone. The bright spotlight shifted slightly, catching the gold cuffs in my hair and the sharp, uncompromising angles of my face. The low murmur of the ballroom instantly died down. Up on the stage, Chloe's confident smile froze. Her grip on the podium tightened so hard her knuckles turned white. DeAndre stepped forward out of the shadows, his face contorting into a mask of pure panic. He looked around the room, desperately searching for a security guard to intervene, but he was trapped by the protocol of his own event. He could not cause a scene in front of the very people he was begging for money. I leaned into the microphone, my voice amplified through the ballroom cool resonant and entirely stripped of emotion. "Good evening, Chloe," I said. "It is a fascinating presentation. As a cosmetic chemist, I am always intrigued by claims of molecular reconstruction using purely organic compounds. I have a few technical questions about your formula." Chloe swallowed hard. She glanced at DeAndre, then back at me. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Of course, we value scientific inquiry. Go ahead." I did not pause. I hit her with a rapid-fire barrage of high-level chemistry that I knew she had absolutely no capacity to understand. "You claim the serum is fully organic and free of synthetic stabilizers?" I began, my tone strictly professional. "Without synthetic emulsifiers, how exactly are you preventing the separation of the lipid barrier and the water-soluble botanical extracts when the product is exposed to ambient humidity above 60%? Furthermore, what is the covalent bond structure of your primary active botanical? And how are you preventing rapid thermal degradation when the consumer applies heat styling tools to their hair?" The silence in the ballroom was deafening. The investors who moments ago were nodding along to her marketing buzzwords now leaned forward, their brows furrowed. They were business people, but they recognized real scientific scrutiny when they heard it. Chloe stared at me blankly. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked like a student who had just been handed an exam in a language she did not speak. She stammered, her voice high and breathless. "The organic compounds naturally bind together through our proprietary blending process. The botanicals are very strong. They protect the hair." I raised an eyebrow, letting her pathetic, unscientific answer hang in the air for everyone to judge. "They just protect the hair," I repeated slowly, ensuring the microphone picked up my absolute disdain. "That is not chemistry, Chloe. That is magic. And unfortunately for your investors, magic does not hold up in a laboratory." I pulled my smartphone from my small clutch. Earlier that evening, I had paid a very generous visit to the audiovisual technician running the control booth at the back of the room. I tapped a single button on my screen. The sleek minimalist logo on the massive screen behind Chloe instantly vanished. It was replaced by a highly complex color-coded mass spectrometry report. The sudden change caused a collective murmur to ripple through the audience. "If you cannot explain your own formula, allow me to explain it for you," I announced, stepping away from the microphone stand and walking directly toward the edge of the stage. "The graph you are all looking at is a chemical breakdown of the botanical crown prototype. I acquired a sample last week." Chloe stepped back from the podium, her eyes wide with terror. DeAndre was practically vibrating with rage, gesturing wildly at the tech booth, but the technician ignored him completely. "As you can see by the red indicators on the screen," I continued, pointing up at the glaring data, "this formula is not organic. In fact, it is highly acidic. The primary active ingredient is a cheap, unstable derivative of sodium hydroxide masked by heavy artificial fragrances. It is a corrupted, volatile compound. If a black woman with natural, textured hair applies this serum and steps into the sun, the ultraviolet light will trigger a catastrophic chemical reaction." The investors began to whisper frantically among themselves. Several of them pulled out their phones, snapping photos of the data on the screen. I walked right up to the front of the stage, looking directly into Chloe's terrified eyes. "You do not have a breakthrough hair care product, Chloe. You have a biohazard. This formula will cause severe chemical burns to the scalp. It will cause permanent hair loss. It will result in millions of dollars in class action lawsuits before your first quarter even ends." A prominent female investor sitting at the front table stood up, her face pale with shock. Are you saying this product is dangerous? We were told this went through rigorous clinical trials. It went through nothing, I answered, turning to face the investor. Because the woman standing on that stage did not invent it. I turned back to Chloe and DeAndre. I made sure my voice was loud enough to reach the very back of the room. 5 years ago, I drafted the preliminary notes for a botanical compound. I abandoned those notes because the pH levels were too unstable and posed a severe risk of scalp burns. I threw the draft in the trash. Your regional director, DeAndre, dug those notes out of my desk before he left me. He gave my discarded dangerous mistakes to his new wife, and they slapped a shiny label on it to secure your money tonight. The ballroom erupted. The polite, refined atmosphere shattered completely. Investors gasped in horror. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor as several VIPs immediately stood up, grabbing their coats and briefcases, deeply disgusted by the fraud unfolding in front of them. The murmurs turned into loud, angry shouts directed at the stage. "You stole my garbage, Chloe," I said softly, looking up at her shaking form. "And you tried to sell it to my people. That was the breaking point." DeAndre could no longer maintain his facade. The polished corporate executive vanished, replaced by the desperate, vicious man I knew 5 years ago. He stormed across the stage, his face twisted in absolute fury. He shoved Chloe out of the way so violently, she almost tripped over the hem of her silver gown. He grabbed the microphone from the podium, ripping the cord so hard the stand crashed to the wooden floor. He did not look at the angry investors. He did not attempt to explain the data on the screen. He did not offer a single word of apology or defense regarding the chemical burns his product would cause. His eyes were locked entirely on me, burning with a frantic, unhinged hatred. "Shut her up!" DeAndre roared into the microphone, his voice distorting through the speakers. "Turn off that screen right now. Security, get in here. Grab that woman. She is a corporate spy. She hacked our system. Call the police. I want her arrested right now." He stood on the edge of the stage, pointing a trembling finger down at me as two large security guards began pushing their way through the chaotic crowd. He thought he could still control the narrative. He thought brute force and loud accusations could save him from the undeniable scientific evidence glowing brightly behind him. I stood perfectly still, watching the security guards approach. I did not run. I did not panic. I simply looked up at my ex-husband, the man who had thrown me into the freezing rain, and I gave him a cold, empty smile. He had just taken the bait perfectly. The trap was fully sprung. Two hotel security guards reached the front of the stage, closely followed by 3 uniformed police officers, who had been stationed near the gala entrance. They pushed their way through the murmuring crowd of wealthy investors, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. DeAndre's transformation was instant and deeply chilling. The moment he saw the police badges shining under the grand chandeliers, the frantic, unhinged rage completely vanished from his face. He smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, took a deep breath, and morphed effortlessly into the perfect picture of a calm, successful corporate executive dealing with a tragic nuisance. It was the exact same mask he used to wear when he lied to my face about his affairs. "Officers, thank God you are here," DeAndre said, his voice carrying a practiced mix of authority and deep sorrow through the microphone. "I apologize to everyone for the disruption to this beautiful charitable event. The woman standing before you is my ex-wife, Nia. I am afraid she is deeply unwell." He looked out at the audience, shaking his head with a perfectly executed look of pity. Chloe stepped up beside him, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk tissue, playing the role of the traumatized bride flawlessly. "She has struggled with severe mental instability for years." DeAndre continued, his tone dripping with fake empathy. "It is the tragic reason our marriage fell apart. I have tried to be graceful. I have tried to offer her professional help and financial support, but she refuses to accept reality. Her presence here tonight is a desperate, unhinged attempt to ruin my corporate merger out of pure, bitter jealousy." I stood completely still, my face devoid of any emotion. I watched him spin his web of lies, marveling at how easily deception flowed from his tongue. "She claims I stole her formula," DeAndre said, projecting his voice to the furthest corners of the massive ballroom. But as any sensible business person in this room knows, documentation is everything. I do not deal in baseless accusations. I deal in facts. DeAndre snapped his fingers at his assistant, who was hovering nervously near the edge of the stage. The assistant practically sprinted over, handing DeAndre a sleek leather portfolio. DeAndre unzipped it quickly and pulled out a crisp, heavy sheet of paper. He held it up high for the police officers and the front row of elite investors to see. "This is a legally binding, notarized intellectual property transfer agreement," DeAndre announced triumphantly. "It is dated exactly 5 years ago, signed by Nia herself. I purchased the rights to her preliminary unfinished notes for $5,000 because she was broke, desperate, and incapable of developing anything on her own. I took a financial risk on her discarded ideas out of sheer pity." He paced the stage like a seasoned trial lawyer delivering a closing argument. "My brilliant wife Chloe took those raw, useless notes and spent years refining them in a real laboratory into the safe, organic masterpiece we presented to you tonight. And now, seeing our massive success, seeing that I have moved on to a woman of true class and substance, my ex-wife has hijacked this event. She fabricated that ridiculous graph on the screen to cause a panic and extort me. This is textbook corporate espionage, defamation, and harassment." I watched the faces of the investors in the front row change. The shock and scientific outrage they had felt moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by skeptical, judging glances directed heavily at me. The narrative DeAndre was spinning was entirely too comfortable for them. The angry, jealous, unstable ex-wife who could not let go of a successful man. It was a stereotype they digested easily. They looked at my natural locks and my dark skin, then looked up at Chloe, whose light skin and delicate weeping demeanor fit perfectly into their biased idea of innocence. The elite crowd began to mutter among themselves. The gravity in the room shifted entirely in DeAndre's favor. He was giving them a reason to ignore the scientific data glowing on the screen behind him. He was giving them a reason to keep their money on the table. Before the police could even address me, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out from the VIP seating area. He wore a bespoke tuxedo and carried an air of generational wealth that demanded immediate compliance from everyone around him. It was Harrison Caldwell, Chloe's father. He walked straight up to the police officers, completely ignoring my existence as if I were a piece of trash stuck to his shoe. "I am Harrison Caldwell," he announced, his voice booming with arrogant authority. "My family is a primary sponsor of this foundation. This woman just committed a felony against my daughter and my son-in-law. She publicly slandered a multi-million-dollar brand in front of major shareholders. I want her in handcuffs right now." Harrison turned his head slowly, finally locking eyes with me. His gaze was pure ice, filled with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. "You made a massive mistake tonight, little girl," Harrison threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious growl. "You do not understand the kind of power you just provoked. I am going to unleash a legal team so vicious you will not even be able to afford the clothes on your back when they are finished with you. I will sue you into utter oblivion. I will take your little salon. I will freeze every bank account you have ever opened, and I will make sure you spend the next 10 years locked in a federal cell for corporate fraud." The crowd nodded in silent agreement. They loved watching power assert itself. They enjoyed seeing someone who dared to step out of line put firmly back in their place. The lead police officer, clearly swayed by the immense wealth and political influence practically radiating from DeAndre and Harrison Caldwell, turned his attention to me. He unclipped his handcuffs from his belt. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to step away from the microphone," the officer said, his tone commanding and deeply impatient. "We need to take this outside immediately. You are causing a massive disturbance, and we have a formal complaint of trespassing, forgery, and harassment. Let us go quietly, or I will put you in cuffs right here in front of everyone and drag you out." I looked up at the stage. DeAndre was staring down at me over the clear acrylic podium. The look of distress he had worn for the police was completely gone. In its place was a dark, vicious smirk. His eyes gleamed with absolute, unadulterated triumph. He truly believed he had won. He believed that his forged piece of paper, his wealthy new father-in-law, and his polished corporate lies had once again crushed me into the dirt. He thought I was the exact same helpless, isolated girl shivering in the rain 5 years ago, about to be dragged away in disgrace, without a single person to defend her. He thought his trap was flawless. I did not move a single inch. I did not raise my hands in surrender, and I did not argue with the police officer. I simply kept my eyes locked on DeAndre's smug face, maintaining my cold, empty smile. I let him enjoy his victory for 3 more seconds. "Ma'am," the police officer barked, stepping aggressively closer and reaching out to grab my bare arm. "I am not going to ask you again. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Before the officer's fingers could even brush the fabric of my silk gown, a sound like a thunderclap echoed through the massive space. The heavy 20-foot-high solid oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with such violent force they slammed against the marble walls. The loud crash echoed over the sound system, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Every single head in the room whipped around. The music completely stopped. Even the police officers froze in their tracks, their hands dropping away from me. Standing in the grand doorway, silhouetted against the bright lights of the lobby, was Elias Sterling. He stood tall, leaning slightly on his silver-handled cane, his face set in an expression of absolute terrifying fury. But he was not alone. Flanking him like a private, impeccably dressed army were 6 men and women in razor-sharp dark suits carrying thick leather briefcases. They were the senior partners of the most elite, ruthless corporate litigation firm in the state of Georgia. These were lawyers who did not argue in courtrooms. They destroyed entire corporations before a judge even saw the paperwork. The sound of their leather shoes marching in perfect unison against the hardwood floor sounded like a military drumbeat. The crowd of wealthy investors parted instantly, practically scrambling out of the way to let Elias Sterling and his legal team pass. Elias did not look at the police. He did not look at the investors. He walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked entirely on DeAndre, who was now gripping the podium so hard the acrylic was cracking under his hands. The smirk had been violently wiped from DeAndre's face, replaced by the pale, sickening realization that he had just brought a forged piece of paper to a billionaire's war. Elias stopped at the base of the stage. The lead police officer, who had been seconds away from putting me in handcuffs, immediately recognized him and took a respectful step back. Everyone in Atlanta knew Elias Sterling. They knew his wealth, his influence, and his absolute intolerance for foolishness. His presence alone was enough to freeze the entire room. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison Caldwell boomed, stepping forward to intercept Elias, his face flushed with indignation. "I do not know what kind of relationship you have with this unstable woman, but she just ruined a multi-million-dollar presentation. We are having her arrested. I suggest you step aside before your reputation is dragged down with hers." Elias slowly turned his head to look at Harrison. The billionaire did not raise his voice. He did not even look particularly angry when he spoke to the older man. He just looked profoundly bored. "Harrison," Elias said smoothly, his voice carrying effortlessly, without a microphone, "your daughter is standing on a stage trying to sell battery acid to black women, and your son-in-law just handed a forged federal document to a police officer. I suggest you close your mouth and sit down before I have my lawyers seize your entire family estate by breakfast." Harrison Caldwell opened his mouth to argue, but the head of Elias' legal team stepped forward, handing him a thick folder. Harrison looked down at the documents, his face draining of all color. He swallowed hard, took a trembling step back, and sank slowly into the nearest chair. He did not speak another word. DeAndre was panicking. He leaned into the microphone, his voice cracking with desperation. "Mr. Sterling, this is a misunderstanding." Nia signed the transfer. "I have the notarized document right here. It is a legal fact. You cannot just walk in here and disrupt a private charity event. You have no jurisdiction here." Elias did not argue with DeAndre. He did not even acknowledge his existence. He turned his back to the stage, completely ignoring the frantic man behind the podium. He gestured to one of his lawyers, who immediately walked over to the audiovisual control booth at the back of the room. The lawyer handed the technician a small silver flash drive. "Play track 1, the lawyer commanded. Standing over the technician to ensure absolute compliance, "Turn the master volume all the way up." DeAndre dropped the forged document. He stumbled backward, knocking over his display of the Botanical Crown serum. The glass bottles shattered against the stage floor, spilling the harsh chemical-smelling liquid everywhere. "Stop!" DeAndre yelled, his voice echoing wildly through the room. Security, stop them! Do not play that! I own this event. I demand you cut the power. But the security guards did not move. The police officers did not intervene. The entire ballroom held its breath, captivated by the sheer terrifying power Elias Sterling commanded. The massive speakers mounted on the walls crackled to life. First there was the heavy rhythmic sound of rain. It was loud and violent, the unmistakable sound of a massive thunderstorm beating against the roof of a car. Then the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers sliding back and forth across glass. It was the audio from the dashcam of Elias BMW recorded 5 years ago on the exact night DeAndre threw me and Zuri into the street. The microphone on that luxury vehicle was military grade. It picked up every single sound with devastating crystal clarity. Over the sound of the storm, a car door slammed, then a voice rang out through the grand ballroom. It was DeAndre's voice. But it was not the polished professional tone he used for investors. It was cruel, arrogant, and dripping with venom. "Get out and take that child with you," the recorded DeAndre screamed over the speakers. A collective gasp rippled through the gala attendees. People covered their mouths in horror. Then a second voice on the recording spoke. It was Chloe laughing softly over the sound of the rain. "You better hurry up and get out. That nappy hair of yours is going to shrink right up in this weather." Every single eye in the room snapped to Chloe. Her carefully constructed image of grace and innocence shattered instantly. The wealthy investors, the politicians, and the socialites stared at her with open, undisguised disgust. Chloe physically recoiled, covering her face with her hands, as if she could hide from the sound of her own cruelty being broadcast to the most important people in her world. But the recording was not finished. The sound of DeAndre's car speeding away echoed through the speakers. Then a few moments later, his voice came back. It was a phone call he made from his car, picked up clearly by Elias' dashcam as he drove past my location. DeAndre's voice filled the silent ballroom, echoing off the chandeliers and the marble walls, sealing his fate forever. "I forged her signature on the IP docs, Chloe," the recorded voice bragged, followed by a dark, triumphant laugh. "I signed her name right over the line. As long as we leave her in the hood with the brat, she will never have the money to hire a lawyer to prove it. She is nothing. The formula is ours now." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm on that audio track. It was the crushing, suffocating silence of total annihilation. The air was sucked completely out of the room. Not a single person moved, not a single glass clinked. The police officers who had been ready to arrest me slowly turned around to look at DeAndre. Their expressions had hardened into stone. The lead officer reached for his radio, speaking in a low, serious tone, to request backup for a major corporate fraud arrest. I looked over at Patricia and Gregory. DeAndre's parents were standing near the ice sculpture, their faces frozen in masks of absolute horror. Patricia was trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. Gregory stared at the stage, his chest heaving. The son they had worshipped, the son they had used to belittle and degrade me for years, had just confessed to grand larceny, forgery, and the heartless abandonment of his own newborn child in front of the most powerful people in the state. Their precious legacy was completely irreversibly destroyed. I watched Patricia and Gregory turn away from the stage. The arrogant, boastful parents who had just threatened to have me thrown out were now scrambling for the nearest exit. They kept their heads down, desperately trying to avoid the judgmental stares of the high society friends they had spent decades trying to impress. They were leaving their golden child behind, abandoning him just as quickly as he had abandoned me. On the stage, the fallout was instantaneous. Chloe lowered her hands from her face. She looked at DeAndre not with love, but with pure, calculating survival instinct. The wealthy, connected woman who had gladly helped him steal my life realized she was about to go down with a sinking ship. She took a large, deliberate step away from him. "DeAndre," she whispered, her voice shaking. She looked down at the front row of investors, trying to salvage whatever was left of her reputation. "I did not know. He lied to me. I thought she signed the papers willingly." "Shut up, Chloe." DeAndre snapped, spinning around to face her, his eyes wild with panic. "You knew exactly what I did. You helped me draft the fake notary stamp." He turned back to the crowd, raising his hands in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. That audio is doctored, he pleaded, his voice cracking. It is a fake. Elias Sterling is a tech billionaire. He used artificial intelligence to fake my voice. You all know me. I am a respectable businessman. No one believed him. The desperation radiating from his body was suffocating. He had built his entire life on the perception of power, and now stripped of his lies, he was nothing but a pathetic, cornered thief. Then the final blow was struck. From the center of the VIP section, a man slowly stood up. He was a tall, distinguished gentleman with graying hair and an impeccably tailored suit. He was Richard Vance, the CEO of the massive global conglomerate that was scheduled to acquire DeAndre's failing regional division on Friday. This merger was DeAndre's only hope of covering up his massive financial losses. It was the only thing keeping him out of bankruptcy. Richard Vance did not look angry. He looked completely and utterly disgusted. He picked up a thick leather binder from the table in front of him. It contained the final signed contracts for the $70 million merger. He walked calmly down the aisle, approaching the edge of the stage. DeAndre practically threw himself toward the edge of the stage, falling to his knees. "Mr. Vance, please," DeAndre begged, tears actually forming in his eyes. "Do not listen to this. The merger is solid. The numbers are solid. We can still make you millions. Please, Richard, you know my track record." Richard Vance stopped right in front of the kneeling, weeping DeAndre. He did not say a single word. He simply opened the leather binder, took out the thick stack of signed contracts, and gripped them in both hands. With a slow, deliberate motion, Richard tore the contracts entirely in half. The sound of the thick paper ripping echoed loudly in the silent ballroom. It was the sound of DeAndre's entire corporate empire being reduced to garbage. Richard tossed the torn pieces of paper directly into DeAndre's face. The pieces fluttered down, landing in the puddle of spilled acidic hair serum on the floor. Richard turned his back on DeAndre and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. DeAndre remained on his knees, staring blankly at the ripped papers soaking in the chemicals on the floor. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He had lost his investors. He had lost his corporate merger. He was about to lose his freedom. The police officers stepped up onto the stage, their handcuffs unclipped and ready. But I knew DeAndre. I knew the depths of his deception. He was ruined publicly, but he still thought he had a secret escape route. He still thought he had his offshore accounts and his hidden mansion in the mountains. He still thought he could run. And I was going to let him run, right into the final trap I had set for him. The lead officer stepped directly over the torn, ruined pieces of the $70 million merger contract. The sharp, abrasive crunch of the broken glass serum bottles beneath the officer's heavy black boots broke the suffocating silence in the grand ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. The luxurious Four Seasons Gala, a place meant for celebrating generational wealth and corporate triumphs, had instantly transformed into a sterile crime scene. The officer did not ask DeAndre to stand up. He grabbed the shoulder of DeAndre's custom-tailored velvet tuxedo and forcefully hauled him to his feet. DeAndre tried to pull away his chest, heaving erratically, sweat pouring down his face and ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "You cannot do this," he stammered, his voice cracking and echoing through the microphone stand that lay discarded on the floor. "I am a regional director. I am a prominent executive in this city. You are making a massive mistake. That audio recording is a complete fabrication. I demand to speak to the chief of police." The officer ignored his desperate, empty threats. He spun DeAndre around aggressively, pinning his chest against the clear acrylic podium that Chloe had spoken from just minutes before. DeAndre Washington, the officer, announced, his voice carrying absolute, undeniable authority. "You are under arrest for corporate fraud, grand larceny, and the forgery of federal documents. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The heavy steel handcuffs clicked around DeAndre's wrists, locking his hands firmly behind his back. The sound was incredibly sharp in the quiet room. It was the undeniable sound of a carefully constructed empire collapsing into dust. The wealthy investors and elite socialites watched with cold, clinical detachment. These were people who worshipped power, capital, and flawless public images. DeAndre had just lost all three simultaneously. He was no longer a peer to be respected. He was a liability to be avoided at all costs. The corporate litigators Elias Sterling had brought with him stood in a perfect, intimidating line at the base of the stage. They watched the arrest procedure with absolute professional indifference, their eyes tracking every movement to ensure the police followed protocol perfectly so DeAndre could not slip away on a technicality later. DeAndre twisted his head around, violently fighting against the officer's tight grip on his arms. He looked desperately out into the crowd of disgusted faces until he finally found Chloe. She had retreated from the center of the stage and was standing near the edge of the VIP tables. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her posture rigid, her face a mask of cold, calculating realization. "Chloe." DeAndre begged, his voice high-pitched and frantic, stripped of all its usual arrogant bass. "Chloe, please, call your father right now. Call his legal team. Have them meet me at the downtown precinct immediately. Tell them they need to bring the bail money. We can fix this baby. I still have the offshore accounts. We have resources. We can fight this in court and clear our names. Do not just stand there and watch them take me." Chloe did not move a single inch to help the man she had vowed to love and support. She slowly looked him up and down, taking in the pathetic sight of the man she thought was her golden ticket to becoming a corporate queen. She saw a man in handcuffs, his expensive tuxedo covered in spilled toxic chemicals and shredded legal contracts, begging her like a cornered animal in front of her entire social circle. She saw her own pristine reputation being dragged straight through the mud of his incompetent lies. Her survival instinct overrode any fake affection she had ever pretended to feel for him. Chloe walked slowly back toward the edge of the stage. She stopped just out of his physical reach. She did not look at him with love, and she certainly did not look at him with pity. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not ever speak to me again," Chloe said, her voice dripping with lethal venom, ensuring the surrounding investors heard her clear separation from his crimes. "You lied to me from the very beginning. You told me you were a massive success. You told me you owned that formula. You are nothing but a common, pathetic thief who used my family name and my connections to cover up your own miserable failures. But Chloe, we are married," he pleaded, tears of pure panic finally spilling over his eyelashes. "You are my wife. You have to help me." Chloe raised her left hand into the air. The massive, flawless diamond engagement ring he had bought with stolen corporate funds caught the light of the chandeliers. She pinched the diamond between her fingers and slid the heavy ring off in one smooth, practiced motion. "I am not going down for a broke fraud," she snapped. She tossed the ring forward. It hit DeAndre's chest and dropped directly into his handcuffed hands, clinking sharply against the cold metal restraints. It was the ultimate rejection. The physical manifestation of his fake life being thrown back in his face. Chloe turned her back on him without another word. She walked briskly off the stage, joining her deeply humiliated father, and they disappeared into the crowd of whispering elites, leaving DeAndre completely and utterly isolated. He let out a pathetic, strangled sound of despair. The police officers yanked him backward, marching him roughly off the stage and forcing him down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The crowd parted for him immediately, but no one offered a single word of sympathy. They shrank away from him as if his failure was a highly contagious disease. I stood perfectly still beside Elias Sterling as DeAndre was marched right past us. He tried to look away desperately, trying to hide his tear-stained face from me, but the humiliation was absolute. He was a broken shell of the tyrant who had terrorized me for years. The officers led him out of the ballroom, through the grand marble lobby, and pushed through the heavy glass doors of the hotel entrance. The weather outside had shifted. A light freezing drizzle had begun to fall over the city of Atlanta. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers reflected brightly off the wet pavement and the sleek glass windows of the hotel. It was a beautiful, poetic symmetry that I had not even planned. 5 years ago, he had violently thrown me into the freezing rain and driven away in a warm luxury car, leaving me to die. Tonight, he was the one being shoved into the back of a hard plastic police seat in the freezing rain, and I was the one standing in the warmth of the lobby, completely untouched by the storm. The lead officer pushed DeAndre's head down firmly, forcing him into the confined space of the cruiser. Just before the officer slammed the heavy door shut, DeAndre looked up. He looked through the rain and the flashing lights right into my eyes. I did not smile. I did not point or gloat or wave goodbye. I just looked at him with absolute terrifying emptiness. I wanted him to know that I felt nothing for him anymore. His power over me was gone. He was completely erased from my emotional world. I had taken his dignity, his career, his wife, and his reputation, and I had done it without raising my voice. The heavy metal door of the cruiser slammed shut, sealing him inside. The police car pulled away from the curb, its sirens wailing as it disappeared into the dark, wet streets of the city. Elias Sterling stood beside me, resting both hands on his silver cane. "You executed that flawlessly, Nia," Elias murmured, watching the taillights fade into the distance. "He has nothing left." I turned away from the glass doors, my face completely neutral. "He thinks he has nothing left," I corrected softly. "But a rat always has a secondary escape route. We just have to wait for him to take it." Hours later, the luxurious warmth of the Four Seasons was a distant memory for DeAndre. He sat shivering in the cold concrete holding cell of the downtown police precinct. The smell of bleach and stale sweat permeated the air. The stark, undeniable contrast from his elite life to this miserable cage was slowly driving him out of his mind. But the war was not entirely over. DeAndre was a survivor built on deception, and his arrogant mind was already racing, searching for a way out. When the guard finally approached the bars and informed him he was granted his single phone call, DeAndre did not hesitate. He did not call his parents, who had abandoned him at the gala and turned off their phones. He did not even attempt to call a defense attorney, knowing he could not afford a retainer. He dialed a burner number from memory. His hands shook violently as he held the heavy, greasy plastic receiver to his ear. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, cautious voice answered on the other end. DeAndre looked around the empty holding cell, pressing his face against the metal wall and lowering his voice to a desperate, frantic whisper. "It is me!" DeAndre breathed, sweat dripping down the back of his neck despite the freezing temperature of the cell. "Everything fell apart tonight. The corporate merger is completely dead and the police have me locked up. I need you to execute the contingency plan immediately. Do not ask questions, just do it." There was a pause on the line, followed by a grunt of acknowledgement. "Drain the offshore accounts right now," DeAndre commanded, his eyes darting toward the cell door to ensure the guards were not listening. "Transfer every single cent of that hidden money into the untraceable cryptocurrency wallets we set up last year. And prepare the secret house in the mountains. Turn on the perimeter security systems, activate the cameras, and make sure you stock the wall safe with the bearer bonds." DeAndre gripped the phone tighter, a twisted, desperate smile slowly forming on his face as he convinced himself he still had control. "I am going to use a local loan shark to post my bail by tomorrow night," he whispered fiercely. "And the second I am out of here, I am driving straight there, and I am disappearing for good. They think they took everything from me. They think they ruined me in front of the whole city, but they do not know about the house. They do not know about the hidden money. Just get it ready. I am coming home." It took 24 agonizing hours for the loan shark to process the exorbitant bail amount. DeAndre spent every second of that time pacing the freezing concrete floor of his holding cell, listening to the echoing shouts of other inmates. He had been forced to use his one phone call to contact a violent, predatory underground financier he had met years ago in a backroom poker game. To secure his release, DeAndre had agreed to a crushing 300% interest rate, promising to deliver the cash by midnight the following day or face lethal consequences. When the guard finally unlocked the heavy iron door and handed him his personal effects in a clear plastic bag, DeAndre snatched them without a single word of gratitude. He walked out of the downtown precinct into the harsh, unforgiving glare of the late afternoon. The sky above Atlanta was an angry, bruised purple, threatening another massive downpour. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked from when he dropped it on the stage at the gala, but it still functioned. He dialed his parents' number, immediately desperate for an ally. It went straight to a generic voicemail. He tried his sister Jasmine next. The automated voice told him the number was no longer in service. He had been blocked. He checked his email, hoping for a message of support from his corporate lawyers. There was nothing but a formal legal notice of his immediate termination from the company, completely stripping him of his severance package and voiding his stock options. He was a ghost. The elite status-obsessed circle he had sacrificed his own wife and child to join had completely erased him in less than a day. He shivered in his ruined velvet tuxedo. The toxic hair serum from the broken bottles had dried into a stiff, foul-smelling crust on his lapels and trousers. He needed a car. His own luxury vehicles had already been impounded by federal authorities, frozen along with his known domestic bank accounts. He walked 3 blocks in the dropping temperature to a discount rental agency, using a prepaid debit card he had kept hidden in his wallet for extreme emergencies. The clerk behind the counter did not recognize the former high-flying regional director. She just saw a desperate, disheveled man in dirty clothes. She handed him the keys to a 10-year-old beat-up compact sedan that smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and damp upholstery. DeAndre got into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The engine sputtered to life with a pathetic grinding whine. As he pulled out of the cramped lot, the bruised sky finally broke open. A massive thunderstorm descended on the state, mirroring the exact same weather from 5 years ago when he had kicked Nia out of his car. But DeAndre did not see the poetic justice. He only saw an inconvenience. He merged onto the highway, gripping the worn plastic steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was heading north, driving straight toward the remote, heavily wooded mountains of North Georgia. For the first hour of the drive, the silence in the cheap rental car was suffocating. The windshield wipers squeaked violently against the glass, struggling to keep up with the torrential downpour. The heater barely worked, blowing lukewarm air against his shivering legs. But as the towering city skyline faded in his rearview mirror and the dense, dark trees of the mountains began to swallow the highway, the crushing weight of his public humiliation started to recede. DeAndre's pathological narcissism, the core trait that had driven his entire life, began to kick back in with a vengeance. He started talking to himself, his voice filling the cramped, foul-smelling cabin. "They think they won," he muttered, hitting his palm against the steering wheel. "That arrogant old billionaire and that bitter, jealous ex-wife. They think they took everything. They do not know anything." He pressed his foot down on the gas pedal, forcing the cheap engine to struggle against the steep, winding incline of the mountain road. The anger in his voice slowly shifted into a twisted, manic confidence. He needed to rebuild his ego, and delusion was his favorite tool. "I built that regional division from nothing." DeAndre continued, his eyes wide and frantic in the dark. Chloe was a fool, an absolute amateur. If she had just kept her mouth shut and let me handle the presentation from the start, none of this would have happened. She panicked. And my parents, cowards. The second the pressure hit, they ran away to protect their country club memberships. But I do not need them. I do not need any of them. I never did. He laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that barely pierced the noise of the raging storm outside. He was no longer the weeping, desperate man begging on his knees at the Four Seasons. In his own mind, he was once again the smartest person in the room. He was the ultimate survivor, surrounded by inferiors who simply did not understand his genius. The truth was, DeAndre had been preparing for a potential corporate disaster for years. He knew his financial numbers were manipulated. He knew the massive risk he was taking by faking quarterly reports. That was exactly why he had spent months setting up the ultimate contingency plan. He had used a highly secretive, anonymous shell company based in a tax haven to purchase a hidden sanctuary far away from the city. It was a $3 million smart mansion, buried deep in a gated, ultra-exclusive mountain enclave, where the neighbors were miles apart, and privacy was the only currency that mattered. The property was an architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and imported stone. It was entirely off the grid, equipped with its own power supply and a state-of-the-art security system. More importantly, it was completely untraceable. His name was nowhere on the deed or the utility bills. The IRS did not know about it. The federal investigators did not know about it. And Nia, the woman he had meticulously hidden his assets from during their divorce, certainly had no clue it existed. "I am a ghost," he whispered to himself, the manic energy radiating from his pores and making him jittery. "I am a literal ghost." He mapped out the next 48 hours in his head with precision. The smart mansion was not just a hiding place. It was a vault. Behind a custom oil painting in the primary suite was a heavy steel wall safe. Inside that safe was a fireproof briefcase containing $2 million in untraceable bearer bonds, several high-quality fake passports he had acquired on the black market, and the digital keys to offshore cryptocurrency accounts that held the rest of his stolen wealth. "I will wait out the storm tonight," DeAndre reasoned aloud, leaning closer to the foggy windshield to see through the driving rain. "Tomorrow morning, I will grab the bonds and the passports. By tomorrow night, I will pay off that miserable loan shark, and then I will be on a private charter out of the country. I will go to a jurisdiction that does not honor federal extradition treaties. I will live like an absolute king, and they will spend the next decade chasing shadows." The thought of outsmarting Elias Sterling and completely escaping Nia's vengeance flooded his veins with a rush of pure adrenaline. He convinced himself that losing his public reputation was just a minor setback. He was simply shedding dead weight. He did not need the corporate title. He had the money, and the money was all that mattered in this world. The GPS on his cracked phone chimed loudly, instructing him to take a sharp left turn onto a private unpaved road. The rental car hit a deep pothole, shaking violently, but DeAndre did not care. He navigated the winding, treacherous path through the dense pine trees for another 4 miles until the road finally smoothed out into a pristine, heated cobblestone driveway. At the end of the driveway stood a massive, imposing wrought iron gate flanked by 2 stone pillars equipped with high-definition security cameras. Beyond the gate, nestled against the side of the mountain, the sleek, modern silhouette of his $3 million sanctuary loomed in the darkness. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows were completely dark, just as he had instructed his associate on the burner phone. The house was in stealth mode, waiting for its master. DeAndre pulled the rental car up to the keypad mounted on the driver's side pillar. He rolled down his window. The freezing rain instantly soaked his shoulder and his face, but he barely felt the cold. He was practically vibrating with anticipation and greedy triumph. He reached out and punched in his highly complex 8-digit access code. He held his breath. For a second, there was only the sound of the rain pelting the roof of the car. Then a sharp electronic beep cut through the storm. The heavy wrought iron gates groaned slowly, swinging inward to welcome him home. DeAndre let out a loud, victorious cheer. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel again, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. "I told you," he screamed at the empty passenger seat, imagining Nia sitting there listening to him. "I told you I always win. You cannot touch me. I am untouchable." He drove the rental car through the gates, the tires crunching over the immaculate, heated driveway. He parked haphazardly near the front steps, not caring about the mud he was tracking onto the pristine stone. He turned off the engine, grabbed his keys, and stepped out into the storm. The sheer scale of the mansion was breathtaking. It was a testament to his greed, a physical manifestation of everything he had stolen and hidden. He walked quickly up the wide, floating concrete steps to the massive oak front door. He did not have a physical key. The entire house was operated by biometric and digital smart locks. He approached the sleek, illuminated panel next to the door. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner and typed in his secondary security PIN. The system whirred quietly. The heavy internal deadbolt retracted with a satisfying metallic click. DeAndre pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The grand foyer was pitch black. The silence of the house enveloped him, instantly shutting out the roar of the thunderstorm behind him. He closed the front door, leaning his back against the solid oak, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of absolute relief. He had made it. He was safe. His plan had worked flawlessly. He reached out blindly in the dark, his hand brushing against the smooth marble wall, until he found the primary control panel. He pressed the master switch to illuminate the ground floor. The recessed lighting flared to life, instantly flooding the massive open-concept living area with bright, warm light. DeAndre dropped his keys. They clattered loudly against the imported tile floor. He did not move toward the stairs to get to his safe. He did not take off his ruined jacket. He did not breathe. He stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it stopped his heart dead in his chest. The lights were on. Sitting directly in the center of the massive custom Italian leather sofa was me. I had changed out of the midnight blue silk gown I wore to the gala. Now I was dressed in a sharp tailored black blazer and matching trousers, looking completely at ease in the luxurious space. A fire was roaring cheerfully in the massive stone fireplace to my left, casting a warm, golden glow across the room and contrasting sharply with the freezing storm raging against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. I held a crystal glass filled with an expensive vintage red wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes locked on his pale, terrified face. Stepping out from the deep shadows of the grand living room were four men. They were my personal security detail dressed in identical dark suits. They did not draw weapons or make any sudden aggressive movements. They simply stood there like silent, immovable statues, completely blocking any potential physical threat DeAndre might try to pose. DeAndre looked like a drowned rat. His ruined velvet tuxedo clung to his shivering frame, still reeking of the acidic hair serum he had knocked over hours ago at the hotel. His shoes were caked with mud, leaving dirty footprints on the pristine imported tile of the foyer. The arrogant, triumphant smile he had worn just seconds ago when the front door unlocked had vanished completely, wiped away by a reality his brain simply could not process. Nia, he choked out, his voice cracking violently. How are you here? How did you get inside this house? I did not answer him immediately. I let the crackle of the fireplace and the sound of the heavy rain hitting the glass fill the room. I wanted the silence to stretch. I wanted him to feel the absolute suffocating loss of control before I delivered the final blow. I asked you a question, DeAndre yelled, stepping further into the foyer, his chest heaving as he tried desperately to summon the dominant, terrifying persona he used to weaponize against me. This is a highly secure private property. The gates are locked. The biometric scanners are encrypted. You hacked my system. This is a federal crime, Nia. I will have you arrested for breaking and entering. He reached toward his wet jacket, his hand hovering near his waistband in a pathetic attempt to feign being armed. I have a gun, he lied, his breathing erratic. I will shoot you for trespassing. Get out of my house right now. Get these goons out of my living room before I defend my property. I lowered my wine glass, resting it gently on the stone coaster on the glass coffee table. I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. It was the first time I had laughed in his presence in 5 years, and the sound of it seemed to unnerve him more than the silent security guards did. Your house, I repeated, my tone dripping with polite curiosity. Are you absolutely sure about that, DeAndre? I picked up a thick black leather binder resting on the table next to my wine glass. I slid it firmly across the smooth glass surface. It glided perfectly, stopping right at the edge of the table, just a few feet away from where he stood, trembling. Open it, I commanded. My voice was no longer conversational. It was the sharp, undeniable voice of an apex predator cornering its prey. DeAndre hesitated, his eyes darting frantically between me, the binder, and the security guards. Slowly, with shaking hands, he walked forward and flipped the heavy leather cover open. The first page was a master deed of trust, stamped with the official seal of the State Real Estate Commission. You were very careful during our divorce, I explained smoothly, leaning back against the plush leather sofa. You knew I was entitled to half of our marital assets, so you began funneling money away and hiding your big purchases. When you bought this $3 million estate, you did not use your own name. You used an anonymous shell company called Apex Holdings. DeAndre stared at the paperwork, his eyes scanning the legal jargon as his breathing grew incredibly shallow. You thought you were a financial genius? I continued, savoring the destruction of his ego piece by piece. You used a proxy firm to buy this house to hide it from me. You set up blind trusts and layers of corporate encryption. You thought you were invincible. But you were so focused on hiding the money you forgot to do your due diligence. You forgot to check who actually owns the proxy firm you hired. DeAndre flipped to the second page with a trembling finger. It was the corporate ownership structure of Apex Holdings. At the very top of the pyramid, highlighted in bold black ink, was the name of the parent company. Black Crown Beauty Enterprises. My company. I bought that proxy firm 2 years ago, I said, watching the last shreds of his sanity leave his body. Which means my holding company owns this property. I hold the deed. I pay the property taxes. I am the one who installed the perimeter cameras, and I am the one who programmed the biometric scanners you just used to open my front door. I took another sip of my wine, the taste incredibly sweet on my tongue. I watched you wire the funds from the Cayman Islands to pay for the landscaping. I watched you pick out the very Italian leather sofa I am sitting on right now. I did not hack your system, DeAndre. I simply let you believe you owned a house that belonged to me. I let you furnish it. I let you pay the maintenance fees into my corporate accounts. And tonight my security system alerted me that a desperate unemployed felon was trespassing on my private property. DeAndre dropped the binder. It hit the floor with a loud, echoing slap. His mouth opened and closed, but his brain could no longer form coherent words. The master plan he had spent hours in the rental car hyping himself up about was nothing but a carefully constructed cage I had built for him. There was no sanctuary. There was no escape. Everything he thought he controlled was entirely in the palm of my hand. But then a new, much more violent wave of panic washed over his face. I could literally see the exact moment the realization hit him. If I owned the house, if I controlled the security system, if I had access to every single room and secret compartment in this mansion, then the house itself was not the only thing he had lost. The safe. DeAndre gasped, a horrible choking sound tearing from his throat. He completely ignored me. He ignored the 4 massive security guards standing just feet away. He spun around, his wet shoes slipping frantically against the polished marble floor, and sprinted down the wide hallway leading toward the primary bedroom suite. No! He screamed, his voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. No, no, no! I did not chase him. I simply stood up from the sofa, smoothing the wrinkles from my blazer, and followed him at a slow, leisurely pace. My security team fell in step right behind me, their heavy footsteps a steady drumbeat against the floor. We walked down the hallway, listening to the frantic, chaotic sounds of destruction coming from the primary bedroom. I stepped into the doorway of the massive suite. DeAndre had torn the room apart in a matter of seconds. The expensive bedside lamps were knocked over and shattered. The custom bedding was dragged onto the floor. He was standing in front of the far wall where a large, abstract oil painting had been hanging just hours before. He had ripped the heavy canvas off the wall, throwing it carelessly aside, entirely desperate to reach what was hidden behind it. Behind the painting was the heavy steel door of his hidden wall safe, the vault where he kept the $2 million in untraceable bearer bonds. The vault that held his high-quality fake passports and the digital hardware wallets containing the encrypted access codes to his offshore cryptocurrency accounts. The vault that represented his absolute last chance at survival, his only ticket out of the country. DeAndre stood frozen in front of the wall, his hands hovering uselessly in the air, his fingers twitching. He did not need to punch in the combination. He did not need to bypass the biometric security lock. He did not need to do anything at all. The heavy steel door of the safe was hanging wide open, and the dark interior of the metal box was completely devastatingly empty. DeAndre stood frozen in front of the empty wall safe. His chest heaved as if the air in the room had suddenly turned to ash. He reached inside the dark metallic cavern, his hands frantically scraping against the cold steel backboard, desperately searching for a hidden compartment or a false bottom that did not exist. There was nothing. No bearer bonds, no offshore account codes, no fake passports. The vault was completely stripped. His breathing escalated into sharp, ragged gasps. He slowly turned around to face me, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. The last tether holding his sanity together snapped violently. "You took it!" he screamed, lunging forward a few steps before my security detail instantly closed the distance, their massive frames forming an impenetrable wall between him and me. "You stole my money. You found the safe and you emptied it. Give it back to me, Nia. That is my money. I earned it." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute destruction of a man who had built his entire life on the belief that he was smarter than everyone else. I did not touch your money, DeAndre, I said, my voice cutting through his chaotic screaming like a razor blade. I do not need your stolen scraps. My company generates more legitimate revenue in a single month than you have managed to steal in your entire miserable career. Liar! He roared, spit flying from his mouth, his face twisted into a mask of pure primal desperation. You are the only one who knew about the proxy firm. You hacked the house. You took the bonds. Who else could have done it? Who else? I sighed softly, a sound of profound pity that I knew would infuriate him more than any insult. I stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward the massive, 80-inch flat-screen television mounted on the opposite wall of the master suite. I did not take your money, DeAndre, I repeated calmly, but I do know exactly who did. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek black remote control. I pointed it at the television and pressed a single button. The massive screen flared to life, illuminating the dark corners of the bedroom. The video playing was not a live feed. It was high-definition security footage recorded from the discreet camera I had installed directly above the abstract oil painting 2 years ago when I first acquired the property. The timestamp in the bottom right corner of the screen glowed brightly. The footage was recorded exactly 2 days ago. DeAndre stopped screaming. His frantic movements ceased completely. He stared at the screen, entirely captivated by the digital ghost of his own downfall. The video showed the very room we were standing in, illuminated by the soft afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The heavy oak door of the master suite opened, and two people walked in. DeAndre let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. The woman on the screen was Chloe. She was wearing a designer trench coat, her hair perfectly styled, looking incredibly relaxed. But she was not alone. Walking right behind her, his arm wrapped intimately around her waist, was Richard Vance, the distinguished, powerful CEO of the massive conglomerate that was supposed to acquire DeAndre's company. The same man who just hours earlier at the gala had looked at DeAndre with pure disgust and ripped the merger contracts to shreds. On the screen, Richard laughed at something Chloe said, pulling her close and kissing her deeply. Chloe responded with absolute, undeniable passion, her hands running through his graying hair. DeAndre's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the shattered bedside table to steady himself, his knuckles turning white. His eyes were wide, completely fixated on the betrayal unfolding in crystal clear 4,000-pixel resolution. They walked directly over to the wall where the abstract painting hung. Chloe did not hesitate. She reached out, pulled the painting aside, and smoothly typed the highly complex access code into the digital keypad of the safe. She knew the code, DeAndre whispered, his voice completely hollow, stripped of all its former arrogant power. I never gave her the code. I never told her about the passports. I watched him process the reality. She watched you enter it, DeAndre, I said softly. For months. You thought she was just a beautiful, obedient accessory. You thought you were using her family connections to elevate your status. But you underestimated her greed, just like you underestimated my intelligence. On the screen, the heavy steel door swung open. Richard Vance reached inside. He pulled out the heavy fireproof briefcase containing the bearer bonds. He opened it, inspected the stacks of untraceable wealth, and nodded approvingly. Chloe reached in next, grabbing the digital hardware wallets that held the offshore cryptocurrency codes. Richard poured them both a glass of expensive bourbon from the crystal decanter on the dresser. They raised their glasses in a mock toast, clinking the crystal together over the open, empty safe. They look very happy together, I commented, my tone entirely flat. Do not they? DeAndre did not respond. He could not tear his eyes away from the screen. I paused the video right on the frame of Chloe smiling up at Richard. It was the same bright camera-ready smile she had flashed on the stage tonight while trying to sell my stolen toxic formula. Let me explain exactly what happened, DeAndre, I said, pacing slowly across the thick carpet of the bedroom. You thought you were setting up a brilliant corporate merger. But Richard Vance is a shark. He reviewed your inflated financials months ago. He knew your regional division was bankrupt. He knew you were lying. He was never going to buy your company. I stopped walking and looked directly at his pale, trembling face. But Richard Vance is also a man who appreciates an easy target. He started an affair with your new wife. They have been sleeping together for the better part of a year. They knew about the offshore accounts, they knew about the bearer bonds, and they knew that when the merger inevitably collapsed, federal investigators would come looking for the missing corporate funds. DeAndre shook his head slowly, violently, rejecting the truth even as it stared him in the face. "No," he muttered. "No, Chloe loved me. She left her family money for me." "She left her family money because she found a much bigger payout," I corrected coldly. "They used you, DeAndre. They set you up to be the perfect fall guy." Richard Vance tore up that contract tonight to maintain his public image as an ethical CEO who was shocked by your fraud. Chloe abandoned you on that stage to play the victim. And while you were sitting in a freezing holding cell, desperately trying to scrape together bail money from a loan shark, the woman you left me for was already on a private jet to a non-extradition country with every single cent of your stolen wealth. The realization hit him with the physical force of a freight train. He had sacrificed his marriage, he had thrown his infant daughter into a freezing rainstorm, he had alienated his parents. He had broken federal laws, forged documents, and destroyed his entire professional reputation. He had done all of it to build an empire of lies. And in the end, the very people he thought were his allies had simply waited for him to gather all the money into one convenient location before they slit his throat and took it all. He had absolutely nothing. No job, no wife, no family, no money, no escape route. And by tomorrow night, a violent loan shark would be hunting him down for a debt he could never possibly repay. DeAndre let go of the shattered bedside table. His legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto the floor, his knees hitting the hardwood with a dull thud. He did not try to catch himself. He slumped forward, his hands resting limply on his thighs, his head bowed. The heavy, arrogant breathing that usually defined his presence was gone. He was entirely silent. The weight of his utter failure, his staggering stupidity, and the sheer devastating betrayal of the woman he had chosen over me finally crushed him. The massive, impenetrable ego he had cultivated for decades shattered into dust, leaving nothing behind but a hollow, empty shell. I stood over him, watching the physical collapse of the man who had once been my entire world. 5 years ago, I had been the one on my knees, crying in the mud, begging for a scrap of mercy while he drove away laughing. Tonight, the roles were permanently reversed. But the most surprising part was how little I felt. I thought this moment would bring me a rush of euphoric joy. I thought I would feel a triumphant, fiery satisfaction. Instead, looking down at the broken, pathetic creature sobbing quietly on the floor of my $3 million mansion, I felt absolutely nothing. The hatred that had fueled my rise to the top was completely gone. DeAndre was no longer a monster I needed to defeat. He was just a sad, insignificant obstacle I had finally removed from my path. I turned away from him, signaling to the head of my security detail. "We are leaving," I said quietly. "Wait," DeAndre croaked, his voice so weak it barely registered over the sound of the rain against the window. "Nia, wait. Please." He did not try to stand up. He just looked at me from the floor, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading that turned my stomach. DeAndre did not stay put. He dragged his knees across the plush carpet, closing the distance between us in a frantic, undignified crawl. The man who had spent his entire life obsessing over bespoke suits, perfectly trimmed haircuts, and maintaining an aura of untouchable superiority was now writhing on the floor like a crushed insect. He reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the hem of my tailored black blazer. He clung to the fabric with a white-knuckled grip, burying his face against my leg as violent, ugly sobs racked his entire body. "Nia, please," he wailed, his voice muffled by the dark wool of my trousers. "Please do not leave me here. Do not walk away. I have nothing. They took everything from me." I looked down at his hands clutching my clothing. I did not try to kick him away. I just let him stain my suit with his tears and the remnants of the toxic hair serum that had dried on his tuxedo. He looked up, his face slick with sweat and snot, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He shifted his tactic immediately, doing what a narcissist always does when cornered. He played the ultimate victim. "I was manipulated." "Nia," he gasped. choking on his own breath as he tried to speak rapidly. Chloe poisoned my mind. She targeted me because of my position at the company. I was sick in the head. The stress of the regional director job, the pressure to succeed for my family, it broke me. I was not in my right mind when I took that formula from you. I swear to you, I never wanted to hurt you. I was confused, I was weak. I stared at him, marveling at the sheer audacity of his lies. Confused. He had forged federal documents, drained our shared bank accounts, kicked his infant daughter out of a car into a thunderstorm, and spent 5 years building a fraudulent corporate empire on my stolen genius. None of that was confusion. It was calculated predatory malice. When the victim routine did not elicit a single reaction from me, he reached for the sharpest weapon he could possibly find. He reached for my motherhood. Think of Zuri. He pleaded, his voice cracking loudly, his fingers digging harder into my coat. Think of our baby girl. A daughter needs her father, Nia. You cannot let her grow up knowing her father is rotting in a federal prison. You cannot do that to her. I can be better. I can go to therapy. I can be a real father to her now. I will do whatever you want. I will sign any legal contract you put in front of me. I will be your assistant. I will clean your laboratories. I will scrub the floors of Onyx Crown every single night just to be near you. Just tell the police it was a misunderstanding. Give me a job. Let me come back to you. The desperation in his voice was profoundly nauseating. He was willing to publicly become a slave just to save his own skin. He had absolutely no genuine love for Zuri. He had not asked about her health, her schooling, or her well-being once in 5 years. He did not know her favorite color, her loud laugh, or the way she scrunched her nose when she was concentrating on a puzzle. He was just using a 5-year-old child as a human shield to block the consequences of his own criminal actions. Before I could tell him exactly how disgusting he was, a sharp, jarring sound interrupted his pathetic monologue. It was his phone. The device was sitting on the glass coffee table a few feet away, right where he had emptied his pockets earlier in a panic. The cracked screen illuminated the dark room, vibrating aggressively against the smooth glass surface. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim light. It was his sister, Jasmine. DeAndre ignored it completely. He kept his grip on my blazer, his eyes locked on mine, waiting desperately for me to offer him a lifeline. "Answer it!" I commanded, my voice flat and completely devoid of warmth. He shook his head frantically. "No, I do not care about her. I only care about you, Nia. Please listen to me. Please give me another chance." I reached into my pocket, keeping my eyes fixed on his sweating face. "Answer the phone, DeAndre, or my security team will drag you out into the freezing rain right now and lock the gates behind you." Trembling violently, DeAndre scrambled backward on his knees, reaching up to grab the phone off the coffee table. He swiped the cracked screen with a shaking thumb and accidentally hit the speaker button. He dropped the phone back onto the glass, leaving the call broadcasting loudly into the quiet, fire-lit room. Jasmine's voice shrieked through the tiny speaker. She sounded completely unhinged, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic, hysterical panic. "Where are you? You have to pick up. You have to come home right now." DeAndre stared at the phone, his face completely blank. "What do you want, Jasmine?" he muttered, his tone entirely selfish, annoyed that his groveling session had been interrupted. "They are here!" she screamed, sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. "The bank representatives and the federal marshals. They are at Mom and Dad's house. They are foreclosing on the property, DeAndre. They are changing the locks on the front door. Mom is having a massive panic attack on the front lawn. Dad is trying to fight the officers. They are taking the house." DeAndre squeezed his eyes shut, rubbing his forehead. "I do not have time for this, Jasmine. I am dealing with my own problems." "You use the house?" Jasmine wailed, the sound of her absolute terror echoing through the $3 million mansion. "The marshals told us you used the family estate as collateral for a commercial business loan 2 years ago. The loan defaulted today. They are taking the house, DeAndre. They are taking everything. We have nowhere to go. You have to wire the money right now. You told us the corporate merger was happening tonight. Give us the money to save the house." DeAndre looked at the phone, then looked slowly back up at me. He had used his own parents' home to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. The same parents who had belittled me, who had worshipped the ground he walked on, who had actively participated in my emotional abuse for years. They had just abandoned him at the gala tonight to save their own social standing. Now, the reality was crashing down on them. DeAndre had secretly gambled their entire generational wealth to prop up his fake cosmetic empire, and he had lost everything. "I do not have the money," Jasmine DeAndre said, his voice entirely dead. "What do you mean you do not have the money?" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that hurt my ears. "You are a regional director. You just married Chloe. Ask her father. Ask Harrison Caldwell. You cannot let mom and dad sleep on the street. DeAndre, do something." DeAndre reached forward and violently pressed the red button on the cracked screen, cutting his sister off mid-scream. The room plunged back into silence save for the steady crackling of the fireplace and the rain beating against the windows. He did not shed a single tear for his parents. He did not show an ounce of remorse for rendering his own family homeless. He had just condemned the people who raised him to the streets, and it did not even register on his emotional radar. The only thing he cared about was his own immediate survival. He looked back up at me, resuming his position on his knees, his hands reaching out toward my coat once again, completely disregarding the tragedy his sister just described. "They do not matter, Naya," he begged, his voice dropping to a desperate, urgent whisper. "Nobody matters but us. I can make this right. Just give me one chance to prove my loyalty to you." I took a slow, deliberate step back, forcing him to release his grip on my clothing. His hands fell to his sides. I looked down at the man kneeling on my floor. I looked at the mud on his expensive shoes, the foul-smelling chemicals staining his clothes, the pathetic, cowardly tears streaming down his face. I searched my heart for a reaction. I waited for the surge of emotion to hit me. Years ago, seeing him in pain would have destroyed me. I would have rushed to comfort him, sacrificing my own peace to fix his problems. Even months ago, seeing him brought this low might have ignited a spark of fiery, vindictive joy. I had planned this revenge meticulously for 5 long years. I had paid forensic accountants to track his hidden offshore accounts. I had quietly bought his anonymous proxy firm. I had ruined his high society gala, dismantled his career, and cornered him in his own secret sanctuary. I thought this final moment of victory would be explosive. I thought I would scream at him, tell him exactly how much he had hurt me that night in the rain, and demand an apology on behalf of my daughter. But as I looked at him now begging on my imported floor, I realized the profound truth of my healing. He was not worth my anger. Anger requires passion. Anger requires a connection. Anger means you still care on some deeply fundamental level about the person who hurt you. Anger means they still hold power over your emotions. I felt nothing. It was a profound, absolute emptiness. My heart was completely steady. My breathing was perfectly calm. I was looking at a total stranger. A pathetic, hollow, deeply broken stranger who had accidentally stumbled into my orbit and was now being swept away like dust. There was no pity in my chest. There was no sadness for the life we used to have. There was only a cold, sterile indifference. He had finally become exactly what he always told me I was. Nothing. "Get up," I said quietly. My voice did not shake. It held no malice and no compassion. It was simply an instruction. DeAndre blinked, looking up at me with a glimmer of foolish hope, thinking my calm demeanor meant I was going to save him. My security guard stepped forward, grabbing him roughly by the arms and hoisting him to his feet. He cried out in surprise, struggling weakly against their massive grips. "You are trespassing on my property," I stated calmly, turning my back on him and walking toward the grand foyer. "Remove him, Nia!" "No!" he screamed, his voice shattering as the guards began dragging him backward toward the front door. "Nia, you cannot do this. I am your husband. I am Zura's father. Please." The heavy oak door swung open, letting the freezing storm blow into the house. The guards threw him out onto the wet stone steps. He landed hard, sliding in the mud. He scrambled to his knees, reaching out toward the warm light of the doorway, his mouth open in a silent scream of ultimate despair. I stood in the foyer, watching him shiver in the dark. I reached out and pressed the button on the smart panel. The heavy door swung shut, locking automatically with a solid metallic click, sealing him out in the cold rain forever. Through the reinforced security glass of the grand entryway, I watched DeAndre throw his entire weight against the heavy oak. His fists pounded frantically against the barrier, but the soundproof engineering of the mansion reduced his screaming to absolute silence on my end. His mouth was open wide, his face contorted in an ugly mask of pure terror. The freezing rain battered his shoulders, washing away the last remnants of his expensive cologne and the toxic hair serum that had ruined his life. He looked exactly like the pathetic empty fraud he had always been. I walked over to the sleek digital intercom panel mounted on the marble wall. I pressed the external broadcast button. My voice carried out into the storm through the hidden exterior speakers, crisp and commanding, slicing right through the thunder. 5 years ago, you told me to take my child and get out into the rain. I did exactly what you asked. Now it is your turn. I did not wait to see his reaction. I released the button, cutting off the microphone. I turned my back to the door and walked away. My security team fell in seamlessly behind me as we headed toward the heated underground garage where my waiting SUV was parked. I was leaving the $3 million property exactly as I found it. Empty. DeAndre was now trapped outside a fortress he thought he owned miles away from civilization, with a violent loan shark hunting him down and federal marshals waiting to put him in handcuffs. The universe was finally balancing its scales, and I did not need to stick around to watch him drown. The next morning, the violent thunderstorm had completely passed, leaving the city of Atlanta washed clean and sparkling under a brilliant cloudless blue sky. I sat in the dining area of my penthouse. The walls were made entirely of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the city skyline. The space was filled with bright golden sunlight, a stark and beautiful contrast to the dark, freezing street corner where this entire journey had begun. The smell of freshly brewed espresso and warm vanilla pancakes drifted from the open kitchen. There was no tension in the air. There was no fear of being belittled or criticized. There was only absolute, undeniable peace. Sitting across the marble dining table from me was Zuri. She was 5 years old now, vibrant, brilliant, and completely thriving. Her thick, beautiful natural hair was styled in 2 perfect puffs, decorated with small gold beads that chimed softly when she laughed. She was busy using her silver fork to build a small tower out of her pancakes, giggling happily to herself. She had never known the toxic, suffocating environment of DeAndre's family. She had never heard her grandmother call her inadequate, and she had never seen her father look at her with disappointment. I had protected her from all of it. I had built a fortress of wealth and love around her, ensuring she would only ever know her own boundless worth. I leaned back in my chair, wearing a comfortable silk robe, holding a warm ceramic mug between my hands. I watched my daughter smile, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment that money alone could never buy. The quiet chime of the private elevator echoed softly through the penthouse. The polished steel doors slid open and Elias Sterling stepped into the foyer. He was dressed in his usual immaculate tailored suit, leaning slightly on his silver-handled cane. But today, the stern, intimidating aura he usually carried in the corporate world was entirely absent. He looked incredibly proud. He looked like a mentor who had just watched his best student conquer the world. "Good morning, Elias," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning, Nia," he replied, his deep voice warm and resonant. He walked over to the kitchen island. He did not bring any legal documents, financial spreadsheets, or corporate contracts. Instead, he pulled a glossy magazine from his leather briefcase and tossed it casually onto the smooth marble counter. "I think you might want to frame this one," he said, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I set my coffee mug down and walked over to the island. I looked down at the magazine. It was the latest issue of Forbes. The entire front cover was dedicated to a high-resolution, stunning portrait of me. I was wearing my emerald green Tom Ford suit, the gold cuffs gleaming in my natural locks. My posture was regal, unapologetic, and completely fearless. The bold white text of the headline stretched across the bottom of the page. "The billion-dollar beauty queen who took back her crown." Below the main headline, a smaller subheading read, "How cosmetic chemist Nia Sterling revolutionized the organic beauty industry, and built an empire from the ground up. I reached out and traced the glossy letters with my fingertip. 5 years of sleepless nights, grueling laboratory testing, and relentless corporate maneuvering were encapsulated in that single powerful image. I heard the police picked up your ex-husband early this morning, Elias mentioned, casually pouring himself a cup of coffee from the carafe. He was wandering the mountain roads completely soaked and half frozen. Apparently, he was babbling incoherently about a stolen mansion and missing bearer bonds. The local authorities handed him straight over to the federal marshals. He is facing at least 20 years for the corporate fraud and the forged intellectual property documents alone. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I did not feel the need to celebrate his misery. The news simply washed over me like a gentle breeze, confirming a fact I had already accepted. DeAndre was entirely erased from my reality. That is a shame, I replied mildly, not taking my eyes off the magazine cover. Elias chuckled a deep, rich sound. Yes, a real tragedy. I picked up my coffee mug again and walked back over to the dining table. Zuri looked up at me, her cheeks covered in maple syrup, and offered me a wide, joyful smile. I smiled back, my heart completely full. I had taken the worst night of my life the moment I was thrown away like garbage, and I had used it to forge an unbreakable crown. I had won. It was a total, undeniable victory. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who tried to destroy you, only to build a life far greater than they could ever comprehend? I would love to hear your stories of triumph and resilience in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of reclaiming your power. Remember, the people who try to leave you in the dark only give you the opportunity to become your own source of light. Thank you for being part of my story. The greatest lesson I learned from the darkest night of my life is that your value is never defined by the people who cannot see it. When someone tries to bury you, they often forget that you are a seed. DeAndre thought leaving me in the rain would destroy me, but it only washed away the illusions holding me back. True power does not come from tearing others down. It comes from taking the pain they inflicted and transforming it into an undeniable empire. Never let the cruelty of a broken person dictate the altitude of your success. If you have ever turned your pain into power, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments how you built your own empire.